You don't fail because you lack talent. You fail because you lack control. Control over your emotions. Control over your habits. Control over your impulses. Every achievement you admire is built on one invisible skill: self-mastery. Not motivation, not intelligence, not luck. If you cannot command your own mind, your discipline, and your reactions, you will always work beneath your potential. This audiobook will show you how to master yourself first, because once you do, everything else follows. Chapter 1. Control yourself or be controlled. You are always being controlled by something: emotion, distraction, impulse, or discipline. There is no neutral state. That's the truth most people avoid. They like to believe they are in between, not weak, not disciplined, just living. That's a lie. If you are not actively controlling yourself, something else is doing it for you. That's the key. You wake up and reach for your phone without thinking. Controlled. You react emotionally to a comment, a message, a tone. Controlled. You delay important work because you don't feel like it. Controlled. You have a choice, but only if you're aware enough to take it. Most people aren't. They drift. They react. They consume. They complain. And then they wonder why their life feels chaotic. If you don't choose control, chaos will choose for you. Read that again, slowly. If you don't choose control, chaos will choose for you. Control is not about being rigid. It's not about becoming cold or robotic. It's about command. Command over your reactions. Command over your attention. Command over your behavior, especially when it's uncomfortable. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lose because they lack ability. They lose because they lose control at the wrong moment. You've seen this before. A talented employee ruins a promotion because they can't handle feedback. A smart entrepreneur sabotages a deal because they react emotionally under pressure. A gifted athlete self-destructs because they can't control impulse, ego, or anger. High potential, low control. That's the pattern. It's not about intelligence. It's not about opportunity. It's not about talent. It's about discipline. It's not about how capable you are when things are easy. It's about how controlled you are when things are hard. Pressure reveals who is in control, and pressure is coming whether you like it or not. So let's be clear. Control doesn't mean you don't feel emotion. It means emotion doesn't drive the wheel. Anger shows up. You don't obey it. Fear shows up. You don't surrender to it. Discomfort shows up. You don't retreat. You acknowledge it, and you act anyway. That's control. Most people think control is something you're born with. It's not. It's trained. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you train control. Every time you do what you said you would do, even when you don't feel like it, you train control. Every time you resist distraction, you train control. Small moments, daily moments, That's where this is won. But most people don't want to hear that. They want a mindset trick, a motivational quote, a burst of inspiration. That's not control. That's dependency. You don't need their permission to be disciplined. You don't need motivation to act. You don't need perfect conditions. You have a choice, right now, as you're listening. Are you the kind of person who reacts, or the kind of person who responds? Reaction is automatic. Response is chosen. Reaction is fast and emotional. Response is calm and deliberate. Reaction gives your power away. Response keeps it. That's the difference between being controlled and being in control. And here's the part most people miss. Control starts before the big moments. You don't magically become composed in a crisis if you live undisciplined in private. You don't suddenly gain emotional control under pressure if you avoid discomfort every day. The way you handle small impulses trains how you'll handle big ones. That's the key. If you can't control your sleep, your food, your attention, your words, you won't control yourself when it actually matters. Chaos doesn't arrive suddenly. It's invited quietly. Through skipped commitments, through unchecked emotions, through constant distraction. And chaos always sends the bill later. So what do? You start simple, not easy, simple. You pick one area where you've been reacting instead of deciding. Maybe it's your temper. Maybe it's procrastination. Maybe it's distraction. Maybe it's avoidance. You don't fix everything at once. That's chaos pretending to be ambition. You choose control. One decision at a time. Next time you feel the urge to react, pause. That pause is power. Next time you want to quit, continue anyway. That's discipline. Next time you want comfort, choose discomfort. That's training. You have a choice, and every choice is a vote for who's in control. This chapter is not here to motivate you. It's here to confront you. Because until you accept this truth, that you are either controlling yourself or being controlled, nothing else in this audiobook will matter. Self-mastery begins here. If you don't choose control, chaos will choose for you. You've taken the first step by becoming aware of it. But awareness alone is not enough. Next, you need to understand what gives chaos its power in the first place. You've learned that reaction is the enemy. Now it's time to dismantle it. You mastered the idea of control. Now, let's talk about the behavior that gives your power away fastest. Chapter 2. Stop reacting and start commanding. Most people think reaction is normal. It isn't. It's trained weakness. Reaction is what happens when something outside you decides what happens inside you. A comment, a delay, a mistake, a tone of voice. And suddenly, your mood shifts. Your focus breaks. Your behavior changes. That's not strength. That's surrender. Reaction hands your power away. Command takes it back. That's the key. Reaction is fast, emotional, and automatic. Command is slow, deliberate, and chosen. And the difference between the two is not intelligence. It's pause. The pause is where power lives. Read that again. The pause is where power lives. Every time you react instantly, you prove something uncomfortable. Something else is in control of you. And here's the hard truth. If someone can control your emotions, they can control your decisions. If they can control your decisions, they can control your life. That's why leaders are trained to pause. Real leaders don't rush to respond. They don't raise their voice first. They don't explain themselves emotionally. They don't panic. They observe. They assess. Then they decide. While others are reacting, they are commanding. Think about any real crisis you've seen, in business, in emergencies, in conflict. The person who stays calm becomes the authority, not because they speak louder, but because they don't. Others look to them, listen to them, follow them. Calm is contagious. So is panic, and panic spreads faster. Most people believe leadership comes from confidence or charisma. It doesn't. It comes from emotional control. You don't need their permission to stay calm. You don't need approval to pause. You don't need to explain your silence. You have a choice. When something triggers you, you can react, or you can command. Reaction feels justified. Command feels uncomfortable. That's why most people choose reaction. They say, "I had to respond." No, you didn't. You chose to. They say, "I couldn't let that slide." No, you couldn't tolerate the feeling. That's the difference. It's not about what happened. It's about how quickly you surrendered control. The pause is where power lives. Let's make this practical. The next time something triggers you, a disrespectful comment, a frustrating delay, a sudden problem, do nothing. Not forever, just for a moment. Breathe. Slow your body down. That pause interrupts the automatic pattern. That's the key, because reaction is habit, and habits can be broken. When you pause, you create space, and in that space, you regain command. You decide what matters. You decide what doesn't. You decide how you move next. Most people skip the pause. That's why they feel constantly overwhelmed. They live in reaction mode. Emails decide their mood. Messages decide their confidence. Problems decide their energy. That's not life. That's servitude. Commanding yourself doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means engaging with it on your terms. A calm response cuts deeper than an emotional outburst. Silence often speaks louder than explanation. Stillness unsettles those who expect reaction. That's power. And here's something most people don't realize. The person who reacts first usually loses. They reveal insecurity. They show urgency. They expose emotion. The one who pauses keeps leverage. In negotiations, in conflict, in leadership, in life. The pause is where power lives. You train this skill daily, not during emergencies, but during inconvenience. When you want to interrupt, pause. When you want to complain, pause. When you want to defend, pause. You don't need to prove anything in the moment. You don't need to win the exchange. You need to keep control. Because control compounds. One calm decision leads to another. One disciplined response builds confidence. One moment of command rewires how you see yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone who reacts. You start seeing yourself as someone who decides. That identity shift is everything. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about refusing to be driven by it. You still feel anger. You still feel stress. You still feel pressure. But you don't obey it. You observe it. You manage it. You move forward anyway. That's command. And command is learned. The world will test this skill daily. People will provoke. Situations will frustrate. Chaos will invite reaction. Every time you have a choice. React and hand your power away, or pause and take command. That's the practice. That's the discipline. That's how self-mastery is built. You've learned that control starts with awareness. Now you understand that command is built in the pause. But there's another mistake people make. They think emotional control means shutting everything down. It doesn't. Next, we'll destroy that myth completely. You learned how to stop reacting. Now let's talk about what emotional control really is, and what it is not. Most people misunderstand emotional control. They think it means shutting emotions down, ignoring them, burying them. That's not control. That's avoidance. And avoidance always comes back stronger. Emotional control is not suppression. It is management. It means you feel the emotion, but the emotion does not decide. That's the key. Feel it. Acknowledge it. Do not act from it. Read that again. Feel it. Acknowledge it. Do not act from it. Most people skip the middle step. They either explode or deny. Both are weak. Suppression says, I shouldn't feel this. Reaction says, I must act on this. Control says, I see this and I choose. You have a choice. Emotions are information, not instructions. They tell you something is happening. They do not tell you what to do. But most people treat emotion like a command. Anger shows up, they attack. Fear shows up, they retreat. Sadness shows up, they quit. That's not honesty, that's obedience. And obedience to emotion destroys consistency. Let's talk about anger. Anger is one of the most misunderstood emotions. People either fear it or worship it. Anger itself is not the problem. Lack of control is. Anger can sharpen focus. Anger can create urgency. Anger can fuel disciplined action, but only when it's controlled. Uncontrolled anger destroys judgment. It burns relationships. It makes temporary emotions create permanent damage. You've seen this. A moment of rage ruins years of trust. A heated response kills an opportunity. A reckless message ends a relationship. Not because anger existed, but because it was obeyed. Feel it. Acknowledge it. Do not act from it. That pause we talked about earlier? This is where it matters most. You don't suppress anger by pretending it's not there. You suppress yourself when you let anger speak for you. Real emotional strength is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't justify itself. It observes. It decides. It moves forward. Most people are emotionally loud. They broadcast feelings. They perform reactions. Strong people don't. They let emotion pass through without letting it take the wheel. And here's something uncomfortable. If you've been taught to express everything, you've been misled. Expression without control is not healthy. It's chaotic. Not every feeling deserves a response. Not every thought deserves a voice. Not every emotion deserves action. You don't need their permission to stay composed. You don't need to explain why you're calm. You don't need to prove you feel something. You have a choice. When emotion rises, ask one question. Is acting on this helping me or costing me? Most of the time, the answer is obvious. Emotion is fast. Wisdom is slow. That's the key. Controlled emotion is delayed emotion. Not denied, delayed. You let the intensity drop. You let clarity return. Then you decide. This is how leaders operate. This is how disciplined people move. They don't make decisions at emotional peaks. They wait. That waiting is strength. This applies to every emotion. Fear doesn't mean stop. It means assess. Excitement doesn't mean rush. It means plan. Sadness doesn't mean quit. It means recover. Emotion informs. Discipline decides. Feel it. Acknowledge it. Do not act from it. This takes practice. At first, it will feel unnatural. You'll feel like you're holding back. You'll feel uncomfortable. Good. That discomfort is you breaking an old pattern. Every time you don't react immediately, you gain control. Every time you choose behavior over feeling, you strengthen discipline. Every time you pause, you reclaim authority over yourself. That's self-mastery. And here's the real benefit people don't talk about. Controlled emotion creates peace. Not numbness, not emptiness, peace. You stop being dragged around by internal storms. You stop being exhausted by your own reactions. You move with intention. That's power. But emotional control alone is not enough. You can manage emotion and still drift. You can stay calm and still go nowhere. What separates those who grow from those who stagnate is not feeling. It's follow-through. You've learned how to feel without obeying. Now it's time to learn how to act consistently. Because emotion fades, motivation fades, but discipline remains. You mastered emotional control. Now let's talk about the force that replaces it when emotion disappears. Chapter 4. Discipline is stronger than motivation. Motivation is unreliable. That's the truth most people don't want to accept. Motivation comes and goes. It rises when things feel exciting. It disappears when things get difficult. Discipline does not work that way. Discipline operates regardless of mood, regardless of energy, regardless of confidence. That's the difference. Motivation asks, how do I feel? Discipline asks, what needs to be done? And discipline does not negotiate. Say that again. Discipline does not negotiate. Most people build their life around motivation. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel inspired. They wait to feel confident. And while they wait, nothing changes. They call it patience. It's actually avoidance. You have a choice. You can wait for motivation, or you can act on discipline. One feels good in the moment. The other builds a life. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Motivation depends on circumstances. Discipline creates consistency. That's the key. Look at people who actually win, quietly, consistently, without drama. They don't talk about motivation. They talk about schedules, standards, non-negotiables. They show up when they're tired. They work when they're bored. They continue when no one is watching. Not because they feel like it, but because it's decided. Discipline does not negotiate. Most people think discipline is harsh. It's not. Discipline is clarity. It removes debate. It removes excuses. It removes emotional bargaining. When something is disciplined, it's settled. I work at this time. I train even when I'm tired. I don't scroll during focused hours. No discussion. No mood check. That's freedom. Indecision is exhausting. Discipline simplifies. But here's where people get stuck. They confuse discipline with intensity. They think discipline means doing everything at once, pushing hard every day, burning out. That's not discipline. That's impulse. Discipline is boring, repetitive, predictable, and that's why it works. Let's talk about the people who wait until they're ready. They say things like, "I'll start when I feel confident. I just need more motivation. I'm not in the right headspace." Those are emotional delays, and emotion is a terrible planner. Compare that to disciplined people. They don't ask how they feel. They ask what time it is. They act on schedule, not sensation. They win quietly because they're consistent loudly, in private. You don't need their permission to be disciplined. You don't need motivation to act. You don't need confidence to begin. Confidence comes after discipline. Motivation follows action, not the other way around. That's the key most people miss. You don't wait to feel motivated to act. You act, and motivation catches up later. Discipline does not negotiate. Let's make this practical. If you only work when you feel good, you're controlled by mood. If you only train when you feel energized, you're controlled by comfort. If you only focus when you feel inspired, you're controlled by emotion. That's not freedom. That's dependency. Discipline breaks dependency. It says, "I act because I decided to, not because I feel like it." That decision builds identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You start seeing yourself as someone who follows through. That identity shift changes everything. Discipline doesn't require passion. It requires agreement with yourself. An agreement you don't break. That's why small disciplines matter more than big intentions. One daily commitment, done regardless of mood, is more powerful than 100 motivated plans. Small actions, done daily, without negotiation. That's how momentum is built. And momentum changes how you feel. Most people think feeling comes first, action comes second. It's the opposite. Action changes feeling. Discipline creates confidence. Consistency builds belief. You don't believe your way into discipline. You discipline your way into belief. That's the key. And here's something uncomfortable but necessary. If you keep waiting for motivation, you are choosing to stay where you are. Not consciously, but effectively. Because motivation is not coming to save you. Discipline will, but only if you choose it. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen discipline. Every time you break one, you weaken it. There's no middle ground. Discipline compounds, both directions. That's why undisciplined people feel stuck. They don't trust themselves. They've negotiated too many times, made too many exceptions. Discipline rebuilds self-trust, and self-trust creates power. Discipline does not negotiate. It doesn't ask if you're tired. It doesn't care if you're bored. It doesn't care if you're emotional. It executes. And execution is what separates those who talk from those who build. But discipline alone is not enough. You can be disciplined and still distracted. You can be consistent and still unfocused. The next level of self-mastery is learning what to protect and what to eliminate. You've learned how to act without motivation. Now you need to learn how to guard your most valuable resource, your attention. You built discipline. Now let's sharpen it. Chapter 5. The Hidden Cost of Comfort. Comfort feels harmless. That's why it's dangerous. Comfort doesn't attack you. It seduces you. It whispers, "Not today. It's fine. You deserve a break." And slowly, quietly, it erodes your self-mastery. What you tolerate trains you. Say that again. What you tolerate trains you. Every day, your mind is being trained, not by big decisions, by small ones, micro choices. Sleeping in instead of getting up. Scrolling instead of focusing. Choosing easy instead of necessary. None of these feel destructive in the moment. That's the trap. Comfort never announces the cost up front. It sends the bill later. Self-mastery is built through resistance. Comfort removes resistance. And when resistance disappears, strength follows it. That's the key. Most people don't fail because life is too hard. They fail because life becomes too comfortable, too padded, too distracted, too convenient. And comfort rewires the brain. It teaches you to avoid discomfort, to delay effort, to escape resistance. What you tolerate trains you. If you tolerate distraction, you train scattered focus. If you tolerate excuses, you train inconsistency. If you tolerate avoidance, you train weakness. Not because you're lazy, but because you're conditioning yourself. Your brain adapts to what you repeatedly choose. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Comfort makes discipline feel painful. The more comfortable your life becomes, the harder discipline feels. That's why simple tasks feel exhausting to undisciplined people. Their tolerance for resistance is low. They're not broken. They're just undertrained. Comfort has trained them well. You have a choice. You can continue tolerating comfort, or you can reintroduce resistance. Resistance is not punishment. It's training. Just like the body needs resistance to grow stronger, the mind needs resistance to stay sharp. But most people remove it everywhere they can. They automate discomfort away. They distract themselves from silence. They avoid anything that feels effortful. And then they wonder why they feel weak, restless, and unfocused. What you tolerate trains you. Let's talk about daily comfort habits. You don't wake up and decide to lose discipline. You slowly relax standards. One skipped workout, one delayed task, one extra hour scrolling, again and again. Each one sends a message. This level is acceptable. Your brain listens, and soon effort feels foreign. Focus feels painful. Discomfort feels threatening. That's how comfort steals your edge, and it does it quietly. The disciplined person doesn't eliminate comfort forever. They control it. They decide when to rest. They decide when to disconnect. They decide when comfort is earned. Undisciplined people let comfort decide for them. That's the difference. What you tolerate trains you. If you tolerate hitting snooze, you train avoidance. If you tolerate distraction during work, you train broken focus. If you tolerate quitting when it's uncomfortable, you train retreat. These are not character flaws. They are habits, and habits can be reversed, but only if you stop lying to yourself. Comfort feels good now, but it makes tomorrow harder. Discomfort feels hard now, but it makes tomorrow easier. That's the trade. And every day, you choose which direction you're training. You don't need their permission to choose resistance. You don't need motivation to be uncomfortable. You don't need to overhaul your life. You need to stop tolerating weakness. Start small. Choose one comfort you've been indulging in without question. Just one. Maybe it's scrolling first thing in the morning. Maybe it's avoiding difficult conversations. Maybe it's delaying important work. You don't need to remove all comfort. You need to reintroduce intentional resistance. Do the hard thing first. Sit in silence instead of distraction. Finish the task even when it's boring. That discomfort you feel? That's training. And training builds self-trust. Every time you choose resistance, you tell yourself, I can handle this. That belief compounds. Comfort does the opposite. It tells you, I need ease to function. And that belief weakens you. What you tolerate trains you. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Comfort makes emotions louder. When your life is easy, small inconveniences feel massive. When your tolerance for discomfort is low, everything feels overwhelming. That's why disciplined people seem calm. They're used to resistance. They don't panic at pressure. They don't collapse at inconvenience. They've trained themselves. Not through motivation, through standards. Comfort erodes standards. Discipline enforces them. And standards are what create self-mastery. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of what you tolerate. That's the key. So ask yourself honestly, what am I tolerating that is training weakness? What am I avoiding that would build strength? The answers are usually obvious. They're just uncomfortable. Good. That discomfort is the signal. You don't need to punish yourself. You don't need to live in misery. You need balance. Controlled comfort, chosen resistance. Rest with intention. Work with discipline. Comfort on your terms. not comfort running your life. Because once comfort is in control, self-mastery disappears. And without self-mastery, everything becomes harder. You've learned how discipline beats motivation. You've learned how comfort quietly erodes strength. Now it's time to talk about the resource comfort attacks most aggressively: your attention. Because distraction is comfort in disguise. And if you don't protect your focus, nothing you've learned so far will matter. You learned the cost of comfort. Now let's talk about the skill that turns discipline into progress. Most people think focus is something you either have or you don't. They say, "I'm just not a focused person. I have a short attention span. My mind doesn't work that way." That's not truth. That's a story. Focus is not a personality trait. It's a trained skill. And like any skill, it's built or neglected through repetition. That's the key. You don't become focused by wanting it. You become focused by protecting your attention. Because attention is always being spent on notifications, on noise, on problems that don't matter, on information you didn't ask for. If you don't decide where your attention goes, something else will. And whatever controls your attention controls your life. What you protect your attention from determines who you become. Say it again. What you protect your attention from determines who you become. Most people try to focus by forcing themselves to concentrate harder. They rely on willpower. That fails. Willpower is limited. Environment is stronger. Focused people don't have more willpower. They have fewer distractions. They don't fight temptation all day. They remove it. That's discipline applied to attention. Let's be clear. If your phone is within reach, it's pulling your focus. If notifications are on, your mind is fragmented. If distractions are everywhere, deep focus is impossible. That's not weakness. That's biology. Your brain responds to stimulus. It chases novelty. It reacts to interruption. So stop blaming yourself and start designing control. You have a choice. You can keep trying to push through distraction, or you can eliminate it. Elimination beats effort every time. That's the difference between amateurs and disciplined thinkers. They don't say, "I'll try not to get distracted." They say, "I won't allow distraction in the first place." What you protect your attention from determines who you become. Let's talk about repetition. Focus is not built in long bursts once a week. It's built daily, in small windows, through consistency. 10 minutes of uninterrupted focus today, 20 tomorrow, 30 the next. That's training. Most people expect instant, deep focus. They've trained distraction for years, and then they're surprised they can't concentrate for 5 minutes. You don't undo years of fragmentation overnight. You rebuild attention the same way you lost it, one decision at a time. Repetition trains the mind what to expect. If you constantly interrupt yourself, your mind expects interruption. If you constantly switch tasks, your mind resists depth. But when you stay with one thing, even when it's boring, your mind adapts. It settles. It sharpens. It locks in. That's focus. And focus feels uncomfortable at first. Because distraction is easy. Focus requires restraint. Restraint from checking. Restraint from switching. Restraint from escaping. That discomfort is training. What you protect your attention from determines who you become. Now let's talk about restraint. Restraint is saying no repeatedly. No to notifications. No to unnecessary input. No to information that adds no value. Every yes to distraction is a no to depth. Most people consume far more than they create. They absorb far more than they act. And consumption fragments attention. Creation demands focus. That's why focused people limit input. They don't watch everything. They don't respond instantly. They don't stay constantly connected. Not because they're antisocial, but because they're intentional. You don't need their permission to disconnect. You don't need to respond immediately. You don't need to be available at all times. Availability is not productivity. Availability is vulnerability. And if your attention is always available, it will always be taken. You have a choice. Protect it or lose it. What you protect your attention from determines who you become. Here's something uncomfortable. If you struggle to focus, it's not because you lack ability. It's because you tolerate distraction. That tolerance trains your mind to expect interruption. Every time you check your phone mid-task, you weaken focus. Every time you multitask, you fracture attention. Every time you abandon depth for novelty, you reinforce shallowness. That's not judgment, that's mechanics. But mechanics can be changed. Start with one rule, one protected block of time. No notifications, no switching, no interruption. Short at first, but consistent. When your mind wanders, bring it back. Not harshly, firmly. That redirection is repetition. That's how focus is built. And here's the payoff most people don't see coming. When focus improves, confidence improves. When focus improves, anxiety drops. When focus improves, work becomes cleaner and faster. Because scattered attention creates stress. Focused attention creates clarity. And clarity creates momentum. Most people feel overwhelmed not because they have too much to do, but because their attention is everywhere. Focus simplifies life. One task, one decision, one action. That's discipline applied to attention. What you protect your attention from determines who you become. But there's another layer. Focus is not just about work, it's about identity. What you focus on repeatedly becomes what you think about. What you think about becomes how you feel. How you feel influences how you act. Attention shapes identity. If you constantly focus on noise, you become reactive. If you focus on progress, you become disciplined. If you focus on distractions, you become scattered. You don't drift into focus, you decide into it. And decision is the theme of this entire book. Self-mastery is not about intensity, it's about control. Control of reaction, control of emotion, control of discipline, control of attention. And attention is the battlefield where most people lose. because they never defend it. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be deliberate. Eliminate what doesn't matter. Restrain what distracts. Repeat what builds depth. That's how focus becomes skill, not wish. You've learned how comfort erodes strength. You've learned how focus must be protected. Now it's time to confront one of the biggest threats to attention and self-mastery: the need to be seen, the need to be approved, the need to be validated. Because nothing fragments focus faster than chasing approval. You've trained your attention. Now it's time to reclaim your authority. Chapter 7. Stop seeking validation to start building power. Most people don't realize how much power they give away every day. Not through failure, not through mistakes, but through seeking approval. Validation feels harmless. It feels social. It feels normal. It isn't. Validation dependence weakens internal authority, and without internal authority, decision-making collapses. That's the key. If you need approval to move, you are not in control. If you need reassurance to act, you are not leading. If you need validation to continue, you are being managed by opinions. Approval is expensive. Silence is efficient. Say it again. Approval is expensive. Silence is efficient. Every time you seek validation, you pay a cost. You pay with clarity. You pay with confidence. You pay with momentum. You start adjusting yourself to be accepted instead of being effective. And that adjustment compounds. You soften your decisions. You delay action. You explain yourself too much, not because it's necessary, but because you want to be understood. That desire is expensive. Strong people don't explain themselves constantly. They don't justify every move. They don't argue with every opinion. They let results speak. Weak authority is loud. Strong authority is quiet. That's the difference. Look at people who constantly explain themselves. They overtalk. They defend. They rationalize. They feel the need to clarify intentions, justify actions, and soften boundaries. Not because they're wrong, but because they want approval. And the more they explain, the less authority they carry. People don't follow explanations. They follow certainty. Approval is expensive. Silence is efficient. Now look at people who have internal power. They say less. They move deliberately. They don't rush to respond. They don't need to be liked in the moment. They need to be effective long term. They don't chase validation. They operate from standards. That's the key. Seeking validation trains you to look outward for permission. Self-mastery requires looking inward for direction. You have a choice. You can keep asking, "Is this okay?" Or you can decide, "This is what I'm doing." One builds dependency, the other builds authority, and authority starts internally. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If criticism derails you, approval controls you. If praise excites you too much, validation owns you. Both are forms of dependence. You don't need their permission to act. You don't need applause to continue. You don't need agreement to be disciplined. You need alignment with your standards. That's it. Validation seeking creates hesitation. You second-guess decisions. You adjust mid-action. You dilute execution. Not because the plan is wrong, but because you're afraid of judgment. That fear is expensive. Approval is expensive. Silence is efficient. Let's talk about silence. Silence is not weakness. Silence is restraint. Silence says, I don't owe you an explanation. Silence says, I trust my direction. Silence says, results will speak. Silence keeps your energy intact. Every explanation leaks energy. Every justification drains focus. Every argument steals momentum. Efficient people conserve energy. They don't argue with noise. They don't debate strangers. They don't respond to every opinion. They move. That movement builds power. Most people think power comes from being heard. It doesn't. It comes from being consistent. Consistency beats approval every time. Here's where people struggle. They confuse validation with feedback. Feedback can be useful. Validation is emotional dependency. Feedback improves execution. Validation seeks comfort. You don't ignore feedback. You ignore the need to be approved. That distinction matters. Strong people listen selectively. Weak people listen emotionally. Approval is expensive. Silence is efficient. Let's make this practical. Notice how often you explain yourself unnecessarily. You explain why you're busy, why you said no, why you chose differently. Ask yourself, was that explanation required or emotional? Most of the time, it's emotional, and emotion leaks authority. The more you explain, the more you signal doubt. The more you justify, the more you invite debate. Silence closes the door. You don't need to announce every move. You don't need to defend every boundary. You don't need to convince everyone. You need to execute. Execution builds credibility. Credibility builds respect. Respect eliminates the need for explanation. That's the progression. People who let results speak rarely need to talk. And here's something most people don't realize. Seeking validation fragments focus. You start thinking about reactions instead of outcomes, opinions instead of progress, perception instead of performance. That's distraction. And distraction weakens self-mastery. Approval is expensive. Silence is efficient. This doesn't mean isolation. It means independence. You stop outsourcing confidence. You stop renting self-worth from others. You build internal authority. Internal authority says, I decide, I act, I review, I adjust. No applause required. This feels uncomfortable at first, because validation is addictive. Likes, praise, agreement, they trigger reward systems, but they also weaken discipline. You start chasing feeling instead of building skill. Self-mastery requires delayed gratification. Validation is instant gratification. You already know which one wins long term. You have a choice. Chase approval and stay reactive, or choose silence and build power. That choice shows up daily. When you want to explain, pause. When you want to defend, pause. When you want to prove, pause.
That pause protects authority, and authority compounds. People start trusting your actions. They stop questioning your direction. They stop needing explanations, not because you demanded respect, but because you demonstrated consistency. Approval is expensive. Silence is efficient. And here's the final truth of this chapter. The more you rely on validation, the less you trust yourself. The more you trust yourself, the less validation you need. Self-mastery closes the loop. You don't need to be seen. You need to be solid. You don't need to be praised. You need to be disciplined. You don't need approval. You need progress. You've learned how to control reaction. You've learned how to manage emotion. You've learned how discipline beats motivation. You've learned how comfort erodes strength. You've learned how focus is trained. And now you've learned how validation weakens authority. But there's still one layer deeper. Even without validation, even with focus and discipline, many people still fail. Because they don't understand where real strength is built. Not in public, not in performance, but in private. You stopped seeking approval. Now it's time to build power where no one is watching.
Chapter 8. Your habits reveal your level of self-mastery. You can say anything you want about who you are. Your habits tell the truth. Not your intentions, not your goals, not your potential. Your habits. They are the evidence. Habits reveal who is in control, you or your impulses. That's the key. If your habits are inconsistent, your self-mastery is inconsistent. If your habits are disciplined, your self-mastery is disciplined. There is no hiding here. Small actions repeated daily expose the truth. Say it again. Small actions repeated daily expose the truth. Most people want to be judged by their best moments, their big plans, their intense effort, once in a while. Life doesn't work that way. Life judges you by what you repeat. Anyone can work hard for a day. Anyone can be motivated for a week. Anyone can make a dramatic push when pressure is high. That doesn't require mastery. That requires emotion. Self-mastery shows up in routine, in the quiet, in the boring, in the days when nothing exciting is happening. That's where habits live, and habits never lie. If you say you value health, but your routine says otherwise, your routine is right. If you say you want focus, but your habits are scattered, your habits are right. If you say you want discipline, but your actions are impulsive, your actions are telling the truth. Small actions repeated daily expose the truth. This isn't criticism, it's clarity, and clarity is power. Because once you see the truth, you have a choice. You can keep defending your intentions, or you can change your habits. One feels easier. The other changes your life. You have a choice. Let's talk about consistency. Consistency is not intensity. Consistency is reliability. It's doing the same basic actions whether you feel like it or not. That's why consistent routines outperform bursts of effort every time. Bursts look impressive, they feel powerful, but they don't last. They burn energy. They rely on emotion. They collapse under boredom. Habits don't collapse. They don't require excitement. They run automatically. That's why disciplined people look calm. Their systems carry them. Undisciplined people rely on willpower, and willpower gets tired. Habits remove decision-making. When something is habitual, it's settled. No debate, no negotiation. And discipline loves settled decisions. Small actions repeated daily expose the truth. Most people think habits are about productivity. They're not. Habits are about identity. What you do repeatedly tells your mind who you are. If you train daily, you become someone who trains. If you write daily, you become someone who creates. If you focus daily, you become someone who concentrates. Identity follows behavior, not the other way around. That's why people feel stuck. Their habits are training the wrong identity. They want to be disciplined, but they practice impulse. They want to be focused, but they practice distraction. And the mind believes the practice. Small actions repeated daily expose the truth. Now here's where people get uncomfortable. They don't want to look at their habits honestly. They want to explain them. I was tired. I was busy. It was just today. But habits don't care about excuses. They only respond to repetition. One excuse doesn't matter. A pattern does. Self-mastery means you stop explaining patterns and start correcting them. That requires ownership. You don't need their permission to change your routine. You don't need motivation to keep a habit. You don't need perfect conditions. You need a standard. Standards create habits. Habits create identity. Identity creates outcomes. That's the chain. And it all starts with what you do daily. Let's talk about impulse. Impulse is the enemy of habit. Impulse says, do what feels good now. Habit says, do what matters consistently. Impulse reacts. Habit executes. When impulses run your day, habits can't form. That's why people feel chaotic. They don't live by routines, they live by urges. Urges change hourly. Habits don't. Self-mastery is choosing habit over impulse, again and again. Small actions, repeated daily, expose the truth. Here's a hard truth you need to hear. If your habits are weak, your life will feel unstable, no matter how talented you are. Talent without habit creates frustration. Potential without routine creates anxiety. But discipline with habit creates momentum. Momentum simplifies everything. You stop asking, should I? You start saying, this is what I do. That shift is powerful. Now let's get practical. You don't need more habits, you need fewer, done consistently. One habit that supports focus, one habit that supports health, one habit that supports progress. That's enough. Most people fail because they try to change everything at once. That's impulse disguised as ambition. Habits are built through restraint. You choose small. You repeat daily. You refuse negotiation. Discipline does not negotiate. Small actions, repeated daily, expose the truth.
If you want to know your real level of self-mastery, don't look at your goals. Look at what time you wake up, how you start your day, what you do when no one is watching, how you respond to boredom. That's the real assessment. And the good news is this: habits are honest, but they're not permanent. They can be rewritten, but not through motivation, through structure. Same time, same action, same standard, again and again and again. That repetition builds trust with yourself, and self-trust is everything. When you trust yourself, decisions become easier. When you trust yourself, confidence rises. When you trust yourself, discipline strengthens. And that trust comes from kept promises, not big promises, small ones. Small actions repeated daily expose the truth. If you say you'll do something and you do it, you reinforce self-mastery. If you say you'll do something and you don't, you weaken it. There is no neutral. Every habit is a vote for control or a vote for impulse. You have a choice. And that choice shows up every day whether you acknowledge it or not. This chapter is not asking you to be perfect. It's asking you to be consistent. Consistency beats intensity. Routine beats emotion. Habit beats impulse. That's how self-mastery becomes visible, not through words, through behavior. And when behavior is aligned, everything else follows. You've learned how validation weakens authority. You've learned how habits reveal the truth. Now it's time to talk about where the strongest habits are built. Not in public, not for praise, but alone, in silence, because silence is where discipline deepens. You've seen your habits clearly. Now let's talk about where real toughness is forged.
Most people want to look strong. Very few want to be strong. That's because real strength is built where no one is watching. No applause, no validation, no recognition. Just you and your standards. The work you hide creates the strength you show. Say it again. The work you hide creates the strength you show. Mental toughness is not built on stage. It's built backstage, in private routines, in silent discipline, in moments no one will ever see. That's the key. Anyone can perform when eyes are on them. Anyone can push when praise is guaranteed. Anyone can rise when pressure is public. That's not toughness. That's adrenaline. Mental toughness shows up when there is no reward, except self-respect. Most people collapse in private and perform in public. Strong people do the opposite. They train in silence. They struggle quietly. They sharpen themselves without witnesses. And when pressure arrives publicly, they look calm. Not because they're special, but because they've already paid the price privately. The work you hide creates the strength you show. Look at people who seem unshakable. They don't panic easily. They don't rush decisions. They don't crumble under stress. That composure didn't appear magically. It was trained. Through early mornings no one saw. Through routines done without praise. Through standards kept even when no one would know if they were broken. Mental toughness is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't advertise effort. It doesn't seek recognition. It simply holds. Most people want motivation from the outside. They want someone to see them trying. That's dependency. Self-mastery requires independence. You don't need their permission to work harder in private. You don't need validation to keep your standards. You don't need applause to continue. You have a choice. You can either build strength for show or build strength for substance. Only one lasts. The work you hide creates the strength you show. Let's talk about private discipline. Private discipline is what you do when skipping would be easy and unnoticed. When no one would call you out. When no one would be disappointed. When no one would know. That's the test. Do you still show up? Do you still train? Still focus? Still follow through? Or do you relax standards because there's no audience? That answer tells you everything about your level of self-mastery. Mental toughness is built in those moments, not in dramatic pushes, not in public declarations, in repetition, quiet, uncelebrated, unseen. That's why mentally tough people don't talk much about their discipline. They don't need to. They trust it. They've seen it hold up again and again in private. The work you hide creates the strength you show. Here's something most people don't understand. Public confidence is a byproduct. Private discipline is the cause. You don't practice confidence. You earn it. Confidence comes from knowing you've done the work, even when it was inconvenient. That's why disciplined people walk differently, speak differently, decide differently. They're not guessing. They're not hoping. They're certain. Because certainty comes from proof, and the proof was built in private. Most people are exhausted because they're trying to look strong without being strong. They perform confidence. They project discipline. They talk about standards. But privately, they negotiate. They excuse. They avoid. That gap creates anxiety. Because deep down, they know. You can't fake self-trust. Mental toughness removes that gap. When your private actions match your public posture, pressure loses power over you. That's real confidence. The work you hide creates the strength you show. Now let's be honest, private work is boring. No dopamine hits, no recognition, no immediate reward. That's why most people avoid it. They want visible progress, visible effort, visible praise. But visible work builds fragile strength. Invisible work builds durable strength. That's the difference. Self-mastery is trained in solitude. When it's just you and discomfort, you and resistance, you and the decision to continue. Those moments wire your nervous system. They teach your mind, I can handle pressure. I don't collapse under difficulty. I keep going. That belief is earned, not imagined. And once it's earned, it shows everywhere. In how you speak, in how you move, in how you decide. That's why mentally tough people don't overreact. They've been here before, in private, many times. The work you hide creates the strength you show. This applies to everything: training your body, sharpening your focus, managing your emotions, keeping your habits. If you only do the work when it's visible, you're training dependence.
If you do the work when it's invisible, you're training toughness. You have a choice. Ask yourself this honestly. Who am I when no one is watching? That version of you determines everything. That version of you shows up under pressure. Because pressure doesn't create character, it reveals it, and character is built privately. One silent routine at a time. This doesn't mean isolation. It means integrity. Your actions align whether someone is watching or not. That alignment creates calm, because there's nothing to hide, nothing to pretend. Just standards, kept consistently. Mental toughness is not aggression. It's stability. It's knowing you'll do what needs to be done regardless of mood, audience, or recognition. The work you hide creates the strength you show. Here's the challenge of this chapter. Stop announcing your effort. Stop seeking credit for discipline. Stop needing to be seen. Just do the work. Quietly, relentlessly, consistently. Let the results speak later. People will notice eventually, but by then you won't need them to, because you'll already know who you are. And that knowing is power. You've learned how habits reveal truth. You've learned how toughness is built in private. Now it's time to bring everything together, because self-mastery is not just about control or discipline, it's about alignment. Aligning your standards, your actions, and your identity. You've built the foundation quietly. Now it's time to understand what happens when self-mastery is complete. You trained in silence, now let's talk about the final shift, when everything begins to obey.
Chapter 10. Master yourself first, then everything obeys. Most people chase outcomes: money, status, confidence, success. They chase what is visible, and they wonder why nothing sticks. Because outcomes don't create order. Self-command does. That's the key. Once self-command is established, everything aligns. Goals stop feeling heavy. Habits stop feeling forced. Confidence stops being performative. Not because life gets easier, but because you get steadier. Self-mastery is the root. Achievement is the fruit. Say it again. Self-mastery is the root. Achievement is the fruit. You don't force fruit to grow. You tend the root. And the root is control. Control over reaction. Control over emotion. Control over discipline. Control over attention. Control over standards. When those are in place, results follow quietly. This is where most people get it backwards. They say, once I succeed, I'll be disciplined. Once I'm confident, I'll be consistent. Once things improve, I'll get serious. No, you have a choice. You can keep waiting for life to change, or you can change how you operate. People who stop chasing success and start enforcing standards win differently. They don't rush. They don't beg outcomes. They don't perform confidence. They enforce. They enforce routines. They enforce boundaries. They enforce discipline. They enforce focus. Standards become law, and life responds to law. That's the shift. Self-command means you don't argue with yourself anymore. You don't debate basic actions. You don't negotiate standards. You decide once, then you execute repeatedly. Discipline does not negotiate, and self-command doesn't hesitate. When you master yourself, noise loses influence. Opinions lose power. Circumstances lose control. You don't become arrogant, you become stable. Stability is rare, and rarity commands respect. Most people live reactively. They adjust themselves to the environment. Self-command flips that. You bring order to the environment. That's leadership. Not titles, not authority given by others. Authority earned internally. Self-mastery is the root. Achievement is the fruit. Let's talk about confidence. Real confidence doesn't come from wins. It comes from self-trust. And self-trust is built one way only: by doing what you said you would do, again and again and again. That's why disciplined people don't chase confidence. They generate it. They know how they'll respond under pressure. They know they won't collapse. They know they won't quit at the first discomfort. That knowing creates calm, and calm is powerful. Goals stop feeling intimidating when your behavior is reliable. Ambition stops feeling stressful when your habits are stable. You stop hoping you'll show up. You know you will. That's self-command. Most people want control over life. Very few are willing to control themselves. But life mirrors leadership. If you lead yourself well, life becomes manageable. If you don't, life becomes chaotic. You've seen this pattern everywhere. People with fewer resources but strong discipline outperform those with more talent and less control. People with clear standards move faster than people with endless options. People who enforce routines quietly outgrow those who chase breakthroughs loudly. Self-mastery is the root. Achievement is the fruit. And here's the truth most people miss. Once self-command is established, you stop chasing motivation. You don't need it. You don't chase clarity. You create it. You don't chase confidence. You build it. You don't chase success. You attract it through consistency. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes ordered. And order beats chaos every time. You have a choice. You can keep trying to control outcomes, or you can control inputs. Outcomes are delayed and unpredictable. Inputs are immediate and controllable. Your behavior, your habits, your standards. That's where power lives. People who master themselves don't rush decisions. They don't panic at setbacks. They don't overreact to wins. They stay steady. Steady people win long term. That steadiness is trained. Through everything you've learned so far, pausing instead of reacting, managing emotion without obeying it, choosing discipline over motivation, rejecting comfort when it weakens you, protecting focus aggressively, letting silence replace validation, building habits that tell the truth, training privately without applause. All of that leads here. Self-command. And when self-command is real, everything else starts to obey. Your schedule aligns, your energy stabilizes, your decisions sharpen, even setbacks become useful. Because you're not fragile anymore.
You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need external control. You are the system. Self-mastery is the root. Achievement is the fruit. Let this sink in. You don't need to become someone new. You need to enforce who you already decided to be. That enforcement is daily, quiet, unemotional, and powerful. The strongest people are not intense. They are consistent. They don't talk about standards, they live them. They don't announce discipline, they demonstrate it. They don't seek control over others, they control themselves. And because of that, everything else lines up. This is the final shift. From chasing to enforcing, from hoping to deciding, from reacting to commanding. You mastered reaction, you mastered emotion, you mastered discipline, you mastered focus, you mastered silence, you mastered habit, you mastered private toughness. Now you understand the truth behind all achievement. Self-mastery is not one skill. It's the foundation beneath all skills. And once the foundation is solid, building becomes inevitable. Self-mastery is the root, achievement is the fruit. You've learned how to build the root. Now it's time to live it. Next, we bring everything together, not as theory, but as a final challenge. A line you either cross or don't.
You don't need more information. You need more control. Control over your reactions. Control over your habits. Control over your attention. Everything you want, confidence, success, respect, peace, sits on the other side of self-mastery. So here is the challenge. Starting today, stop reacting. Stop negotiating with weakness. Stop waiting for motivation. Choose one disciplined action. Do it daily. No excuses, no emotion. Master yourself first, and watch how everything else begins to fall in line.